Today, I'm sharing with you the first few chapters of Sunny Side Up. Sunny Side Up is Book 5 of the Dragonborn Academy series, and there are spoilers here, so if you haven't read the first 4 books, now is your chance to fix that. Go to my website, www.tlchristianson.com, for links and more details. Cracked Open, Book 1, is available for free on most major ebook sites.
You're listening to Sunny Side Up, Book 5 of the Dragonborn Academy. Written by T.L. Christianson. Narrated by the audio production team at Myth and Moon Press. Ashe and Sydney have just returned from the mythical dragon realm, but their homecoming is marred by unforeseen challenges. Join them on a journey of love, courage, and sacrifice in this gripping fantasy tale.
Prologue. Sydney. I gazed around at my surroundings blearily, blinking to clear my vision. The ceiling above me was a perfect dirty white square surrounded by faded mint green walls. The color was pretty and reminded me of Easter in London with George and the plastic hay he'd put in my basket every year. I struggled to my elbows, causing ripples along the still water of my mind. This wasn't London, and George wasn't here. But it wasn't George that my heart called out for. It was someone else, a man with crystal blue eyes and dark hair that fell into them. In my thoughts, this dream guy pushed the wayward lock back with a swipe of his hand. He meant something to me more than George. Who could mean more than George? You, I breathed, trying to fill in the missing pieces like a puzzle. My memories felt far away, and when I reached for them, they seemed to move beyond my reach. This guy, in my mind, was important. I loved him. I knew him, but how? Dream Guy's full lips curved into a smile. "What's your name?" I whispered hoarsely, my voice sounding like gravel through my parched lips. A muffled voice came from outside the room. "She's waking up," he'd said in French. How did I know what he said? How did I know French? Clearing my throat, I struggled to sit, but only managed to roll to my side. The small room was empty, except for a metal toilet and sink combo that jutted from the wall. Industrial tile made up of swirling shades of tan and white lined the floor. It was cracked and dirty. Sucking in a deep breath to fortify myself, I struggled into a sitting position, only to fall back down onto the bed. Another voice drew my attention to the wall behind me. An industrial metal door with a small window near the top was about 1 meter away. Even though I could hear the voices outside, I couldn't quite distinguish who stood there. Blinking, I swallowed and steadied myself. I had to sit up. "Sit up! Damn it!" I shouted to myself. With a groan, I managed to pull myself upright, my legs falling like dead weight off the bed. I was in a jail cell. I was in a freaking jail cell. This should bother me. I knew it should bother me. But for some reason, I couldn't muster up the correct fear or anxiety over my situation. When the door burst open, I just lay there staring at the 2 men who entered the room. They wore dark blue scrubs, and as they neared me, I didn't move. Grabbing my arms, they hauled me up to sit against the wall. After one of them shoved a pillow behind my back, he smiled, the gesture not reaching his eyes. "We brought you something to eat. Are you hungry?" he asked in French. "Idiot. She can't understand you," the other spat. I could only blink as I watched their interactions. Then, speaking in a French accent, Idiot turned back to me. "You are hungry." "Yes." I blinked again, too weak to reply. "Julian?" He motioned to his partner, who pushed a hospital tray into the room. After Idiot adjusted the table, he shoved it toward me before setting a tray on the surface. The plastic platter contained some green mush that once was a vegetable, a hunk of beef, and a small roll. A dish filled with pills and a small, weak plastic fork was off to the side. Julian pulled me up higher before filling a plastic cup with water and bringing it to my mouth. I gulped greedily before coughing, sputtering and pushing his hand away. "Where am I?" I whispered hoarsely. Both men shared a look before Julian answered in unaccented English. "You're safe. That's all you need to know." "What are these?" I cleared my throat when my voice gave out. "What are the pills you're giving me?" "Prenatal vitamins." My heart stuttered inside my chest. "What?" I managed to croak out. The two men chuckled before sliding out the door. My chest heaved up and down as I sat staring at the door. Just as I was about to look away, another face came into view, a face I knew I should fear. Memories began flooding into me. I didn't live with George anymore. I lived with Ashe at the academy. Where was Ashe? Where was I? Powered by adrenaline, I pushed the tray away and staggered to the door. I tried the knob, but it didn't give, and the door wouldn't budge. Laughter came from outside the room, and I pounded on the industrial window. Hey, let me out. I don't belong here. I don't belong here." I pounded and yelled until my body and voice gave out. When I was spent, which didn't take long, I slid to the floor with a sob. I called on Aerith, but she didn't answer, and cold ran up my spine. My grandfather hadn't taken this threat seriously, and now these assholes had finally done it. They'd finally gotten their hands on me. These were the people who'd been trying to abduct me. They wanted to do horrible things to me and Ashe. Where was he? Was he okay? Had they hurt him? That moment seemed so long ago, but it had happened barely a month before. My eyes lingered on the black-clad soldiers as they worked to set up sleeping tents for us to stay in during our mandated isolation. Most of the doctors and nurses, wearing hazmat suits, had left after giving us each a complete medical examination. According to Ashe, they'd been uneasy because they could feel our power as high primes, a new word the Abraxans used to describe us primes within the Tetrid bond. The memory of his voice rang through my mind until a shout pulled me from my thoughts. What the Corbin's roar pulled my gaze to him as he stood shaking his arm. Blood ran down his hand from his torn. Out IV, pacing across the forest floor, his boots crunched pine needles as he spat curses. A mask-covered nurse ran over, gripped the Eaton's arm, and pressed gauze to the bleeding IV site. "You need to sit down until the IV is done," he said in a firm tone. As the nurse cleared his throat and motioned to Corbin's camp chair with a patiently bored expression, we all watched with interest. "No, I'm done with this crap." Corbin growled low in his throat. "I can't sit here any longer." The nurse sucked air through his teeth as he scrutinized the impatient prime. Finally, figuring it wasn't worth the fight, he nodded. "All right, your bag is almost empty anyway, but I need to wrap your arm before you do anything." After walking away, the nurse turned back to the belligerent soldier. "Keep the gauze pressed to the wound, and don't go anywhere," he added with a stern expression. Corbin nodded before sinking down into his chair. Evgeny rounded the medical tent, still yammering into his sat phone in Russian, probably just to irritate the briny people. I shared a look with Ashe, and he lifted one shoulder while giving me a twisted smile. Of course, Evgeny had refused the IV, and when no one insisted, I suspected that he'd used compulsion to get his way. The nurse wrapped Corbin's arm, and when he was done, the Eaton Prime jumped to his feet before darting off into the forest. "What was that all about?" I asked as my eyes followed the nurse as he began to remove one IV after another, carefully wrapping purple stretchy stuff around the IV sites. Durand stared at me, his brows coming together and lips curling into a sneer. "It's the whole possible mate thing," Ashe spoke into my mind. I pressed my lips together, turning to him. To my bondmate. Ashe and I were connected in this unfathomable and incredible way that was just crazy. "In a way you crave, my dragon, Aerith," breathed into my head. "True," I replied with a smirk. "But sometimes knowing he hears my thoughts and can feel my emotions scares me. Not that I have anything to hide." Arth snorted. "No, but you humans are so closed off to each other. This is where most of your problems come from." I considered her words. Maybe, but it can be unsettling to be an open book, you know. Humans make things so complicated. Eondian growled, interrupting our conversation. Ashe furrowed his brow and pinned me with a questioning stare. I just shrugged my shoulders and smiled. I'd gotten a lot better at blocking my thoughts, but still, there were things that I couldn't hide from Ashe, like my emotions or what the dragons knew. Thankfully, another nurse moved between Ashe and me to remove my IV. While she did that, I focused on my mental shields. If I wasn't careful, I could project emotions to most Dragonborn. I could do thoughts too, but that was a lot more challenging. As a prime, I'd been powerful before, able to speak to dragons, but now, with the bond complete, these new abilities pierced my soul with fear. I could now bend people and dragons to my will. My grandfather abused this mechanism to get his way and stay in power. Arthur used his ability to separate my parents when they'd bonded. Evgeny and Celine had been a threat to Arthur's power, and he'd abused their ignorance to divide and weaken them. Instead of helping and guiding them, the young high primes were traumatized and abused. Thankfully, I had Evgeny, my bio-dad. He was older and wiser and had been able to keep me from becoming another pawn for my grandfather to use. I chewed my thumbnail, absent-mindedly watching the nurse wind stretchy purple stuff around my arm. When she was done, I made my way to the plastic table nearby, where the remains of our lunch sat. Untouched sandwich, wedges sat drying out on a tray, along with wilted greens dotted with feta at the bottom of a bowl. I picked up a brownie and nibbled on the edge before grabbing a napkin and wrapping it up to place in my pocket. "Sid." Ashe was behind me. His warm presence called to me, making me ache, making me long to feel the high from our connection. I leaned back against him, but instead of squeezing me close and kissing my neck, his hands closed around my arms, and he pushed me away. I turned to look into his eyes, biting my lip, and breathed into his mind. "What's wrong?" "Not here," he replied. "Walk with me." I bit my lip in worry and nodded. I wanted reassurance. I needed his touch and his love, and I was being selfish. He had his reasons, of that I had no doubt, but his rejection still stung. Everyone here had treated us as if we'd done something terrible. Like our bond was something awful, and after all Ashe and I had gone through, him rejecting me and telling me he wouldn't willingly complete the bond, his rejection only reminded me of that time. Looking over to him to hold his hand, I sighed when he crossed his arms. The rebuff made my heart clench and my eyes sting, but I followed him anyway. My eyes followed my mate as he strode ahead of me and around the tent. "What is wrong with you?" I asked, taking in his stiff posture. Once we were out of sight of the others, Ashe stopped and turned to me. Taking my hands in his words weren't what I wanted to hear. "You need to stop." "What?" I huffed out. My cheeks heated and my eyes filled, but I blinked to clear them away. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" His face softened, and he tilted his head as his arms wrapped around my body with a tight squeeze before pulling away to meet my gaze. "We need to be careful, okay? We shouldn't touch or flirt or kiss in front of other Dragonborn right now." I shook my head. Why?" "I don't understand. Everyone already knows our bond is complete. They all know what we've done." I trailed off when his features hadn't softened. "You said it yourself, that every Dragonborn will be able to feel our connection." Ashe sucked in a deep breath before blowing it out as he glanced around nervously. I know. But hearing about it and seeing it are two different things. You don't have anything to prove. The fact is that our age difference still freaks people out. Does it still freak you out? I asked, scrunching up my nose. Afraid of the answer. When it's just you and me, no. But until you're acknowledged as an adult, our people will believe that I've done something wrong. Do you understand that? I nodded sadly. I have to prove to them that I'm still the same person. I have to prove to them that I can still do my job, that I deserve my job, that I haven't. He trailed off. His guilt and shame flowed through the bond to me. Stop, I whispered, bracketing his face with my hands. Stop doing this to yourself. You've done nothing wrong. You're right, but they make me feel like I have, he hissed. A loud throat clearing made us jump apart. Evgeny stood a few feet away, looking completely put together, with an expensive suit, with blonde hair neatly coiffed. You know, Ashe, there was a time when no one could sneak up on you. Ashe's lips tightened before that familiar mask of indifference fell over his features. You didn't sneak up on me. He hesitated before lifting his chin in question. You have news? Evgeny raised one eyebrow as his pale gray eyes flicked over us. Near Celine, they'd been a vibrant silver, but away from his bondmate they lacked that inner illumination. I came to tell you that we'll be leaving immediately for California. From there, Sydney, you will go back to Balar. A gasp escaped my lips, interrupting him. What? He tilted his head back condescendingly at me before continuing. As our law states, a mate bond is sacred, and as such, the two of you will not be separated. However, since we will be in the mundane world where our sacred ways are not acknowledged, the two of you will have to be legally married. I blinked rapidly at this statement. The funny thing was that as much as I loved Ashe, I had never wanted this whole mate bond, let alone a marriage. Wasn't this just a bit fast, even with the bond? I was never one of those girls who grew up thinking about some big wedding. In fact, the thought of getting married had never crossed my mind until Evgeny had brought it up earlier in the summer. I'd only wanted to get married to keep Ashe. But now, with the bond, we didn't need it, or so I assumed. Ashe's frown cut into my contemplations, and I wondered how much of my thoughts he'd been able to read. Did he want marriage? Maybe he did. After all, he'd planned to propose to Lacey on the very day we'd met. Only, life had stepped in and changed the course of both our lives in one fell swoop. I've had the papers faxed to my private jet. They should be there when we board. Evgeny glanced between the two of us. Neither of you has the luxury to refuse. This time, he added while looking pointedly at Ashe. I know, my mate responded, his lips pressed together and face serious. Sydney. Evgeny's brow wrinkled as if he expected me to fight him. Are you freaking kidding me? Did Bio-Dad just expect me to fight him on everything? Give me some credit here? I understand, okay? I'll sign them. He nodded once before acknowledging me, wearily. Good. Before he could walk away, I spat out his name. Evgeny? He clenched his jaw as he turned to take me in. He asked with one raised brow. Are we going to talk about what happened back there? He tilted his head back, looking at me down his nose. I thought he'd say something, but instead he just swallowed hard. I cleared my throat and continued. You know, like the whole Celine thing, and like why she didn't come back. Do you know why she would stay? My gaze strayed to the pine branches above me before settling on Bio-Dad again. I bit my bottom lip nervously before meeting his eye. The irritation rolled off him in waves, but I wanted more answers. No, I needed more answers. Why didn't you stay? I finally asked in a whisper. Evgeny's eyes narrowed. We're not talking about this. Shaking his head, he huffed out a breath before turning and walking away. What was that? I whispered to Ashe. Why won't he talk to me? Why wouldn't he just explain things to me? You can't ask him things like that. Why not? Just because. Ashe sucked in an audible breath before he pulled me into his warm body. I pushed away and looked up into his eyes. Why? Why are you all so bloody secretive? I mean, Evgeny spends millions of dollars in 15 years looking for his mate, and then he's just like... Straightening my shoulders, I lowered my voice and took on the crisp, almost abrupt way Evgeny spoke. We're not talking about this. Shaking my head, I paced the needle, strewn ground behind the massive tent before swatting at a rope that hung from the corner. It bounced back and forth, the knot on the end thwacking against the canvas. After another lap, I turned to Ashe. Are we going to talk about this? He stood rooted to the spot, his arms crossed as he watched me. As usual, his expression was carefully neutral. It was a mask he wore, and one I was used to, but it pissed me off that he was purposely keeping me out. Well, I asked. Don't hide things from me. Seriously. He widened his eyes before splaying his arms wide. I don't know what you want from me, Sydney. I mean, what do you want me to say? You want me to speculate why Celine stayed. I don't know her, as far as Evgeny's concerned. He lifted a shoulder. He's a closed book. Always has been. I'm not talking about him anymore. I'm talking about you. I snapped, instantly regretting my tone. Ashe's forehead wrinkled in accusation as he stared at me. This right here is why I fought this bond. Why I wanted you to be older when we completed it. Scrubbing his hands over his face, he sighed before meeting my eyes again. This time worry and pain crossed his features. I didn't mean that. Sid, I'm sorry. But it was too late. His words had struck home, hitting some horrible dark fear I'd harbored. Painful dark feelings bubbled up inside me. Sucking in a ragged breath, I fought back the tears. I never had a choice in any of this. I swept my hands outward. Do you think I like being in the dark, not knowing what's going on? That I want to get married at 17? Do you think I wanted to be used and manipulated by everyone around me? My gaze went to my feet as I scraped my shoe along the ground, clearing a swath of pine needles and leaves to uncover the pale soil. When Ashe said nothing, I turned and walked away toward the forest. Sydney? He called out behind me. I didn't answer. Instead, I just kept walking.
This has been the prologue and Chapter 1 of Sunny Side Up, The Dragonborn Academy by T.L. Christianson. The paperback, ebook, and audiobook are available for purchase. Check out my website, www.lchristianson.com, for links and more details. Thank you for listening and happy reading.